I'm standing in front of the meeting house here at old Quaboag Plantation, where on the 2nd of August, the community, waiting for the return of a train band and the community delegates who had been sent north to Menemessett to meet with the Nipmucs and their great leader, Muttawump, a friend. Right? They were waiting to find out what the Nipmuc's plan was. Out to our east, King Philip and the Wampanoag had risen against the English depredations, and war could be spreading this way. But everyone in the community of Quaboag was pretty sure that the native people were, as they had always been before, firm friends, maybe except for the guide of the expedition, Ephraim Curtis.
You can use your imagination here at Brookfield today, and you can imagine this raggedy column of fleeing men. As Wheeler, who was wounded, said, we ran as fast as our tiredness would allow. And they'll crest the hill and give warning to the community below that the Nipmuc have risen. And literally, as they do that, Muttawump and his warriors will come over the hill behind them, hard on their heels. So a morning that had started out so favorably for the English turns into calamity and chaos after the Nipmuc attack, with the little band scurrying, guided by Curtis and the native guides, back toward Brookfield, closely pursued by Muttawump. The hope was that the little community founded around John Pension's mill would provide them with a place to seek refuge in the Ayre's Garrison house, located pretty much in the center of the community. The Ayre's Garrison is a complex of homes, with the tavern being suited for defense. It was the largest building in the community and had 2 floors and a well. Water was critical in a siege situation. However, the location of the home at the base of a hill, surrounded by barns and other homes, would prove compromising when the native people, led by Muttawump, arrived on the scene. The entire train band, or the remnants of the train band, and the community will get into the Garrison house just below us, between the well and the stone wall. And there will occur, over the next 3 days, one of the great sieges of American history. A Mr. Hovey had not been able to get to the Garrison house in time. They will quarter him, behead him, and then take his head and put it on a spear and use it as a trophy and an object of terror, waving it at the settlers in the house. Horror as a weapon, quite often used in native war. Behind me, with carving on it, is what we would call a witness rock. This is known as Indian Rock, and this rock was the command post of the Nipmuc. This is where Muttawump, who would go on to be one of the great commanders, probably the greatest commander of KingPhilip'sWar, would direct the attack. You can see that from where we're standing, we can not see over the lip of this hill. So native people would be able to use the lip of this hill to pop up and fire shots. And they'll get closer and closer to the Garrison house on the first day of the siege and begin firing flaming arrows into the roof of the building. Now, it's filled with 80 people, and those arrows are quite a danger to the entire defensive operation. Captain Wheeler is too badly wounded to maintain command, and so he's passed on command to Lieutenant Davis, and Davis will direct the men in the defense of the Garrison house. Now, you can imagine 700 native people surrounding this position, and things must have gotten really hot down in that Garrison house, even without the flaming arrows. Davis will instruct several men to be on the lookout for those flaming arrows and put them out at all possible haste. He'll also realize very quickly as he does this that there's not enough water inside the house for this to go on long. And there's a well not far away. Let me ascend Indian Rock from maybe the position that Muttawump might have taken and look down and investigate the situation. Standing on the top of Indian Rock, like Muttawump might have, we can see the well at the foot of the hill. It was purportedly just a few yards away from the door. With flaming arrows flying, 2 women in childbirth, and 80-plus people thirsty on a stifling August day, that well became increasingly important. And Thomas Wilson of the community will rush the well to try to retrieve a bucket of water, only to be shot through the jaw and neck. Crawling back into the house, he will survive the siege. Shortly after this, Samuel Pritchard, the son of Sergeant Pritchard, who had been killed earlier in the day at Wheeler's Surprise, will venture forth to bring back some equipment from his family home nearby. Successful in the endeavor, he'll attempt to get to the well himself and will end up captured by the Nipmuc, dragged and tortured back behind the meeting house, and his head will be used as a football in plain sight of the defenders. Again, horror used as a weapon. The house itself isn't doing very well standing up to the outrageously effective firing of the native people from the brow of the hill, using the reverse slope effectively, raining shots down on the defenders and mortally wounding Henry Young and killing one of the townswomen. Now, inside the house, you can imagine native bullets piercing walls. You can imagine the screams of the women and the children. For Muttawump and his native people on the top of the hill, it was a turkey shoot. And yet, native people don't look the same way upon death in battle as Europeans. They didn't want to just charge that house and die. Had they done that, they probably could have gotten to the door and gotten through it. But death in battle isn't a glorious thing to native people. Their notion of battlefield death creates a wandering spirit that has no home. So what they did, rather, is come up with crafty techniques to try to win the position, starting with the flaming arrows and the horror. And it would be on the 3rd day of the siege that Muttawump would pull his greatest surprise, taking a wagon loaded with hay and flax with long poles to push it. He set it on fire, and they would roll it down the hill into the side of the house, and all bets were off at this point. This house should have burnt like a torch, and everyone should have been immolated. And that's not what happened, though. And as the settlers would say, divine providence smiled on the Quaboag Plantation that day, because a sudden downpour from a thunderstorm would quench the fires. Despite the luck the defenders had with the sudden thunderstorm, which not only put out the fiery wagon, but drenched the powder of the native warriors, they were still besieged, and things would have gotten worse had not another stroke of fortune fallen upon them, this time in the form of a herd of friendly dairy cows. Early on the morning of the 5th, Major Willard, with about 45 men in a trained band, mostly mounted, are going to move, having basically busted to get from Marlborough to Quaboag Plantation as quick as they could, as soon as they heard that there was trouble. The wagon attack occurs in the mid-afternoon. That's where Curtis makes his escape. I don't know if he got on a horse or what. He ended up getting news to Marlborough so that these men get here maybe 16 hours later. Willard's men arrive when it's still dark with only 45 men. Muttawump's forces open up a gap to allow them in, figuring that that will just increase the number of trophies that they'll take. They're going to have 45 more Englishmen to kill, surrounded as the plantation is by 500 to 600 Nipmuc. But interestingly, they're not ambushed as the native people think they'll be, because as they move along the road approaching the plantation, a large herd of cattle who haven't been fed well in a couple of days will fall in with them. So you imagine a herd of beef and milk cattle coming down the road. The native people surrounding the Garrison house will hear all of these hoofs, and they'll pull back, which will allow Willard to get to the shelter of the Garrison house. His extra firepower will basically force Muttawump's hand. He'll decide that an attack on this fortified position isn't worth the casualties that will be inflicted, and he will pull out. burning everything as he does. And those cattle who had saved the day will be victims of Muttawump's revenge. But here they are, looking at us now. Probably not direct descendants, but cousins of the heroes of the siege of Quaboag Plantation. Beef and dairy cattle. With the events of King Philip's War spiraling out of control, Brookfield under siege and nearly destroyed, the settlers of the Connecticut River Valley began to worry. In Northampton, they decided on a radical solution. They'd already confiscated the native people of the area's weapons once, the Norwottuck. They had taken their firearms, but then later given them back as a pledge of good faith. But in this case, with Philip's war bands and the Nipmuc rising, it seemed like a good idea to go one step further. What they would do in this case would be to demand their firearms and their children. The Norwottuck ambassadors that had met with the worthies of the community returned to their fort, not far northeast of the settlement, the Northampton, where they debated around a great council fire with an old sachem arguing vociferously in support of remaining at peace with the English. But the young men wanted blood. They wanted to rise and show their manhood. They had seen enough disrespect. The old ways needed to be protected and preserved. And the following morning, when two trained bands of English soldiers arrive at the native fort, they find it abandoned, other than the body of the old man, the old sachem, who'd been tomahawked and left where he lay. The Norwottucks proceeded north, heading for what we would call Muttawump, now Deerfield, the land of native people who had at one time led quite a confederation here among the valley tribes. As they moved, they're followed by the trained bands of Northampton. There are two major takes by historians on the events that happened next. One is that the native people, encumbered by women, children, and elderly, were moving slowly. Another was that they were deliberately moving slowly, masking the women and children who were marching in the front of the column until they got to a perfect ambush site at what we today call Hopewell Swamp. 350 years is a long time and things change, but Mount Sugarloaf still stands where it always did. And just to the south of Mount Sugarloaf, maybe a mile, is this brook that swings around from way up in the north, and it comes down through an area that's been extensively drained. Once upon a time, where this brook crosses the road here was extremely swampy. And up the road, coming from Northampton, would be two English trained bands that were following the Norwottuck native people. When they got to this brook, could have been to the north, could have been to the south, they went down the defile into the bed of the brook. And you can see that this brook is sunken down maybe 25, 30 feet from the level that I'm standing on right now. And as they went down into that brook, they took fire from three sides as Norwottuck native people fired into them at point blank range. After a 3-hour fight with more English coming from the south, the Norwottuck moved north to join the Muttawump, and the Battle of Hopewell Swamp came to an end. I'm speculating that this is where the battle took place. There are 3 potential stream crossings. It was on one of them, and this one is in a direct line with Mount Sugarloaf. So it makes sense that this would be the site where 350 years ago, Northampton paid for their arrogance, paid for their efforts to keep the Norwottucks at peace through disarmament. With the Battle of Hopewell Swamp, the unthinkable has happened. The war has spread to the isolated Pioneer Valley, seen here from the top of Mount Sugarloaf. And it will be here for the next few months that the fires at King Philip's War would burn most brightly. Join me for our next episode in approximately 3 weeks when we highlight the terrible battles of King Philip's War in the northern Pioneer Valley. September 1675 being our next episode. Thanks for fishing historic places for the watch. Like, subscribe, and don't be afraid to share.